So I think we can go ahead and get started as folks are still continuing to hop on.
The water's falling and go.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So hi, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning in today. We're excited to host another informational webinar. I am Michelle de Blasio. I work for the Nature Conservancy here in New Jersey as a freshwater restoration manager. And in my role, I am a project manager for several of our dam removal projects. And so today, I wanted to provide folks with a very kind of high-level understanding of what goes into the early engineering studies of our dam removal projects. This, again, I am a project manager, not an engineer, and so I wanted to provide just those big buckets of work so other project managers that are just getting started understand what the engineers are doing in the field. So this information session is brought to you by the New Jersey Statewide Dam Removal Partnership, which is a collaboration of nonprofits and government agencies that seek to advance the removal of antiquated, dangerously ecologically detrimental dams. We do have a website, which is kind of the storing house of all the information. This information session will be posted to that website. We also have a YouTube channel that you can find informative videos that go into detail about different phases of the dam removal projects. And today's discussion, as mentioned, we're going to focus on those early engineering phases of a project. So I like to say up front, first and foremost, you must have a willing dam owner. So you can't move forward with any of your projects unless you have a willing dam owner that is interested in removal and actually wants you to pursue removal on their property. And some of the big components that go into the early stages of these projects is there's lots of data that's being collected. There's lots of field surveys that your engineers are going to help with. They're going to help perform desktop research, and we're going to get into the different components of the desktop research and of the different surveys today. And then I'll give an overview of some of the engineering data that's being collected that's going to actually feed into those and really make up the engineering design plans. And once we have those engineering design plans, we can get into the permitting process, and so completing those permit applications. So just building up everything that we're going to talk about today is really just a buildup of getting to those permit applications and understanding the components that go into the permit applications. And I do just want to note up front that, not all of these dam removal projects are the same, right? So they're not the same. The actual structures aren't the same size. The amount of sediments behind the dams aren't the same size. Where they're located in the landscape aren't the same, right? So there's nuances to these projects. And so I've done my best to really try to highlight where those differences will be. So giving kind of a broad understanding of what information is collected, and then trying to kind of parse out where, if this, then that, is going to happen. So not all of this information is collected for all removals, but this is, I think, a good mix of, the big buckets of work that is expected to happen. So getting started with your project, you have a willing landowner. And I always say it's good to just, for you personally, to get to know the site and know the property, other adjacent property owners in the area. In addition to the engineers kind of, knowing the site, it's good for you as the project manager to know the site as well. And, the permitting process can be pretty daunting and pretty long, but not always, but it's always good to get ahead of that permitting process. And so the ways we can do that is by reaching out to our regulators early and often. There is, and this is very New Jersey centric, so I know that there's folks joining from other geographies, but this is the permits that we'll go through today, and the components are very much in line with the New Jersey regulations and rules for the permits. But I think that A lot of the permitting agencies are pretty similar throughout our states here in the US, but do want to highlight that this, all the different permits I'll be talking about are Jersey-based. So in New Jersey, we have an Office of Permit Coordination, which is an office that helps to connect you to all the regulators that you may or may not need for your dam removal project. So you can get on that schedule and schedule that pre-application meeting as early as a few weeks or a month. Really, you just need some data. So we'll get into that in a few slides, what you need to go into that pre-app meeting, but just wanted to make a note that you can get on that schedule pretty early, and that the state of New Jersey makes it very easy because they have a one-stop shop for you to contact to get on that schedule. So if applicable, if you have a dam removal that is in, either publicly owned or in the center of a town, something that your engineer can help with is hosting public meetings. It's always good to have, you as the project manager there to be, that relationship builder, but it's good to have that technical person in a public meeting. Oftentimes these projects will generate a lot of excitement in the community. And so if you have a dam that's in the center of town, you may have folks that, have questions about the removal. So it's always good to get ahead of the game and really have your public meeting early on. Now, if you have a privately owned dam, you wouldn't necessarily need to host a public meeting, but you would be able to connect with the landowners by either door knocking or leaving notices, but it would be on a much smaller scale if it's a privately owned dam. So first up, your engineer is going to have a lot of things to do. So this first couple slides are focused on the field data collection and the different surveys that your engineer is going to work on. So first and foremost is reaching out to figure out, or research rather the deeds. And so you can acquire the deeds at the county clerk's office or obtain those public records. And then what you're going to need to do is actually, not you as the project manager, but you as the engineer will need to plot the deeds for accuracy in the field. And so you can see here, this is, roughly what the deeds may look like. And so once you have your property boundaries of where you're actually, what the block and lot is, then you need to take it to the next step and start to look at the features in the landscape. So really what your engineer is trying to do is put together your proposed conditions or your existing conditions in the landscape. So you need to document through your topographical surveys is another survey they'll do where they document everything in the landscape. So your hills, your buildings, your road crossings, your storm drains. And so those topo surveys or the topographic surveys are going to be where they're plotting all of that on a map. And then you would take it, the next step is looking in the river. So through those bathymetric surveys that you're going to see, this is where they're measuring the depth of the water body, and it allows us to map the underwater features of that water body. And so this information can be used for developing those contours of streams and reservoirs. This also allows us to see, maybe where the buildup of sediment is on that stream bottom. So really just documenting those depths within the channel. And so you can see here on the screen, this image I pulled from USGS, which they have a ton of information on usgs.gov. And so this is just one of kind of the fancier ways that they collect that information of the contours of the stream, but there's many different ways to collect this data. And I do want to note that if you ever have a question about what your engineer is collecting, just ask them. All of this information that I'm presenting today is really going through the things that I've learned through working with engineers on our projects. And so it's always good to have the knowledge and information of what they're doing and how they're collecting this information, because some of the things that we're going to get into I find to be a little bit more technical and a little harder to understand. But as a project manager, you always need to present this information to your landowners, right? So having just even that high level understanding of what a longitudinal profile is really helpful. So I think the easiest way to think about these longitudinal profiles that are collected is thinking about the river as a whole system. So from the headwaters out to the confluence, we're really trying to understand and put to paper the characteristics of that river system. And so what the Long Pro allows us to do is see and characterize the average slopes and the different ranges of gradients, the different ranges of pools and scour depths, and the stability of different grade controls, and really seeing the process of that river as a whole. And what your engineer will come up with is what you see here on the screen. This is the Long Pro that you'll see in some of those earlier design plans. And so in this image, you can see this is the dam here. You're looking at, this is flowing downstream, and then it's mapping all those different bed, pool, riffle, all those different characteristics in the stream. So they're also going to perform cross-section surveys, and this is what your cross-section will look like on the map. And so this is a survey that's performed at different portions of your stream reach that you'll be working in. And so the cross-section survey allows us to determine river flow at these specific transects. And so you want to collect this information at points in your survey reach that are representative of that reach. And so if you have a bridge crossing, or you can see in this photo different channels, you're going to want to make sure that you have a cross section here, going where there's going to be different flows, right? So you want to make sure you're representing the flow rate throughout that whole channel, and you can do this via the cross section surveys. And so the extent of your cross section surveys is, that will be very site specific, project specific. Another component of that early field data collection is wetland delineations. So in accordance with the Army Corps, they have standards for our wetlands, and it's required through the permitting process to delineate your wetlands. And so anywhere you're working that is going to you're going to have equipment, or you're going to be moving things around near a wetland, you need to delineate where those areas are. And the wetland delineations just really determine that boundary between, you're determining the boundary between the uplands and the wetlands on that property. And you're following the Army Corps guidelines. So your geomorphic assessment is another piece, and this is where you're looking in the stream at the different pebble sizes. And so a geomorphic assessment allows us to quantitatively or qualitatively rather characterize the stream bed substrates within that project area. So sometimes you can do this via a visual assessment. Maybe the dam is pretty small, like you see here on the screen, where you can see the bottom of the river. There's not too much sediment behind. You can see kind of more rocky, coarse grain size pebbles at the bottom. But sometimes it might require an actual physical survey of the entire area that's been impounded. And so, if applicable, if necessary, if you have a high amount of fine sediment, you may need to send that out for laboratory analysis of those different grain sizes. And so you can see here, a dam at this size isn't holding back that much sediment. So you wouldn't be required to collect sediment samples and ship it out. It's really when you have that fine sediment that more regulatory guidelines apply, because really what we're trying to understand is how the sediment behind the dam is going to be flushing downstream post removal. So here's another image that's maybe a little bit more helpful. You see a dam of this size. This is a front facing view. This is about 18 feet tall. This had a significant amount of sediment behind the dam, right? So we had to take sediment samples. They needed to be analyzed to ensure that there were no contaminants, or if there were contaminants, right? So you're, wrong button. You are trying to understand the composition and the different particle sizes and what's actually, in the sediment. And then you need to assess and figure out, okay, well, how much sediment is behind the dam, and can some of that passively flow downstream to the next river system, or do we need to actively manage that? So this is sort of one of those situations where, if applicable, sometimes we need to go in and physically remove some of the sediment. Sometimes we can, let it passively go downstream. So this is all information that will be gathered in these early stages and included in your plan. So then there is a portion of work that is done via desktop research. So there's a number of different web pages that have a ton of information that we need to assess for fish and wildlife. Specifically, we'll use a couple of these different programs that you can see here. US Fish and Wildlife has their IPAC desktop tool, the information for planning and consultation. And then New Jersey has a specific GeoWeb application. And those two programs, they have a lot of the similar information. Some's a little bit more on a bigger regional level. New Jersey might have a little bit more information for site-specific stuff in New Jersey, but those two programs allow us to see the occurrences of threatened, endangered species or sensitive species, species of concern, and in that very specific project reach. And what we're really looking for is, what wildlife are using that area? Are there rare freshwater mussels that we need to be aware of that might require, avoidance plan during construction? Are there bog turtles in the area? Are there bald eagles, right? So identifying what animals are currently in that area, and then including an avoidance plan or a management plan for how these species will not be impacted. There will be no adverse effects to these species during construction. So that's really what we're trying to gather in this information wildlife consultation with these different desktop research. And then in addition to wildlife, we're also looking at rare plants. Again, we're thinking forward of what's going to go in our removal design plans. So we want to make sure that there's minimal or no impact to any of our sensitive species. And then just like our species, we want to make sure that there's, we look at our cultural resources. So the state of New Jersey has the Historic Preservation Office, and that data is also available via their GeoWeb application. And this is looking at cultural resources, any historical artifacts or archaeological records that may be present, may trigger additional work, such as like additional survey work. So if there's anything historic in the area, the Historic Preservation Office may require you to perform a phase 1A or a phase 1B survey. And that's really just defining in that area what the artifacts are, and then if required, you may need to have somebody on site during construction documenting those resources that are found in the fields, and those specifics again vary with different projects. Okay. Last couple pieces of data, we have what is called this H&H analysis. And so this is where a lot of the more technical things come into play. Again, I am a project manager, not an engineer, so I am going to give you the very high level and understanding of what this hydrologic and hydrologic analysis is. At the very highest level, this is just a tool that's used to identify local benefits of the removal. So through this H&H analysis, we're able to identify things like flood reductions. So you can see here on the map, we're able to say, this is where the river is during current conditions. This is where the water goes in this yellow you see here on the screen, where it goes in a flood condition, right? So this is an analysis that takes into consideration a lot of different components. But most notably, the two big components are looking at the hydrology and the hydraulics. So hydrology, you could think of it hydro, study of water. It's examining the flow duration, flood frequency, the precipitation. So how much water is hitting the landscape and then how that water is entering the stream channel. So we can look at these different hydrological components via different online data sources. So I have listed here just 3 of the common ones that engineers will lean on to gather some of this hydrologic data. So there's the stream, USGS has, the stream stats and the stream gauge data, or you could look at the flood maps through the FEMA's different flood insurance study or the insurance rate maps. So you have the hydrologic analysis, then will be coupled with the hydraulic analysis. And this is really, the hydraulics is really a modeling. So HECRAS might be a familiar term to some, but there's different versions of HECRAS, but at kind of that high level, it's just a model to demonstrate the different scenarios pre and post removal. And so with this model, you can input the different hydrologic data, and then you can start to really see, pre and post conditions. So how is, in a 10-year storm or a 50-year storm or 100-year storm in this particular system, how is the water going to respond? How is it responding now? And how is it going to respond post removal? And how is it going to respond specifically to nearby infrastructure or that connection to floodplains? So that's where all those, that exchange of water through the system is really identified and examined through this H&H analysis. One of the things that will be also come out of that analysis, as I mentioned, is how is it impacting nearby infrastructure? Again, this is kind of one of those if applicable situations, because not all dams, some of the earlier photos you saw, they were nestled in the woods. Some of our dams are, centered in communities or attached to buildings or, downstream or connected to a railroad. So how is the water going to impact any of the nearby infrastructure post removal? And so a scour analysis is another thing that will be included in your engineering designs if applicable. So you'll have, an outline of steps that will be needed to, how is it hitting the buildings now, or how is it hitting the abutments of a bridge now, and what sort of scour protection will be needed. Oftentimes it's rock, riprap, boulders to reinforce those structures. So the hydrologic model also will allow us to see post removal what those velocities and flows are going to look like through the restored reach. And fish passage assessment is one of the things that can be identified through that process. I think many of us would assume that you remove a dam and fish can swim freely up the channel because there's no longer a physical barrier in the stream. But believe it or not, sometimes we need to do further restoration in-stream work to engineer, design fish passage structures to allow fish to pass. Now, you often see this when you have a bridge crossing or certain pinch points in the system where the velocities or flows or depths can be manipulated by nearby infrastructure or different things in the system. And so what we need to assess and include in the design plans is, are the target fish species that these projects are aiming to restore habitat and connectivity for, are they able to pass post removal, or do we need to add in boulders or weirs or pools and certain features within that channel to ensure that the fish can get up to those upstream locations post removal? We don't want to stress the fish out. We want to make sure that they can get up, and there's actually guidelines on specific criteria for our migratory fish and other fish species that say, the depth criteria or the flow criteria. And so we can lean on that information and also, coupled with the H&H analysis, and determine where and if those fish passage structures are needed. Okay, so that was a lot of information summarized in a very short amount of time, but all of that information is eventually going to feed into your design plans. We typically see a couple stages of the design. So we have the conceptual design plans and then a 30% design plan. Those are kind of your first crack at, including the topographical surveys and all the information in the field and really, putting everything on a map, understanding those basic, proposed conditions, the current conditions, proposed conditions. And that sort of information is enough to get you to that pre-application meeting with your regulators and to go over just the general concept or some of the things you're thinking about. So in this particular photo, this is, showing the staging access. And so you can talk to your regulators about, hey, these are the specific components in those pre-app meetings. You can get a little bit of insight from them during that meeting of, hey, well, we'd like to see this, or you should try to avoid that, or maybe, and they can give you, I don't want to call them clues, but they can give you little bits of information of what they're likely going to expect you to do or require as a permit condition. And so after that pre-app meeting, you can then work to fine tune those plans, and you can come up with about what we say 60% design plan. And so this is going to include maybe, that very detail of, this is the staging access, this is the road that's going to be cleared, this is going to be the trees we're clearing to get to the river, this is how much it's going to cost. And so all of that information that you collected in those early stages, plus some more of like that real information of this is the cost, this is actually where we're going to access, goes into the 60% design plan. Something else that would be included in that 60% design is post-restoration. So sometimes when we remove the structure, we need to actually go in and replant the floodplain that's newly exposed. So this is kind of a before and after that you can see here. This particular site had about 35 acres of floodplain. So we needed to come up with a very specific planting plan and how many trees are going to be planted or how many shrubs versus grasses. So all of those details you'd want to include in that 60% design plan to go in with those permit applications. So the types of species, where they're going to go, how much it's going to cost, and timeline, right, when all of that's going to happen. So at that point, you're ready to go into your permit applications with those plans. The plans are never final until your regulatory agencies give you that final stamp of approval. And so you can't get to 100% design plans until you speak and connect with your regulators, and you do that through the formal permitting process. In New Jersey, these are some of the common permits that we apply to. So you have the Bureau of Dam Safety, that's the, to remove the dam. A lot of that engineering and the H&H modeling, that's what, they'll be reviewing as part of that permit review. And then our freshwater wetlands, general permit 16 and 18, that's through the Division of Land Resource Protection. And that's really looking at activities that are going to be working within a freshwater wetland or transition area, and it'll authorize you to work in that area. So that's where all of that desktop research on the wildlife and the species of concern, if any, or your cultural resources, all of that information will be reviewed as part of this permit. You also have the soil erosion and sediment control plan. That's a certificate that's usually goes through the Upper Delaware Conservation District for New Jersey in the Delaware. So it's really through your conservation soil and erosion conservation service, whatever one's in your area. And then the cultural resources is not a formal permit application, but you will get comments back about the SHPO or the Historic Preservation Office during those pre-app meetings. So if applicable, if needed, you would obtain a separate MOA for that, and then your construction activities would require a permit. And there may be others. This is just kind of, again, high level, some of the common ones that we apply to. And once you go through the permitting process, you come out with 100% design plans, which includes every aspect of your project, your staging area, where the rocks are going to go, where the trucks are going to move in the system, the block and lots you're working on. All those details would go into your 100% design plans. And those are the plans that you will take to construction. Those are the plans that will come up with your technical specs, and you can then go, with those plans and actually contract out the work. And I think that is all I have for folks today. And I just want to say thank you so much for joining today's call. It's always nice to see engaged and excited people joining our information sessions. Please do continue to visit njdams.org for event info and more information on upcoming events. I think our next one is on the 14th.
I think so.
More information to come on that. It's either the
Check that
7th or the 14th.
Yeah.
We do have a presentation coming up on freshwater mussels of New Jersey and different
It is November 14th.
14th. Okay, so it is November 14th, but more information will come out about that. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and I want to open it up to questions. You can either pop your questions in the chat. You can take yourself off of mute.
So Michelle, I'll hand over one question from Jim Shanahan earlier, and he was just asking if we have kind of standardized access agreements.
So we do, and so that's one thing I forgot to mention. So your landowners will always need to sign the permit applications, but at the Nature Conservancy, what we have done is we created a site access agreement, and that's actually used for this early engineering it says specifically what the engineers are going to be doing. So they're going to do the pebble count surveys or the cross-section surveys. And so the landowner knows what is happening on their property. And then we like to have that, signed off by, us, the project lead, and then the landowner. And then we also have a landowner agreement, which is used for construction. And that gets a little bit more detailed because you have equipment and liabilities and things like that, and insurance all goes into that landowner agreement. But for the upfront work, we like to have, a site access agreement.
Okay, so he was also asking, would we be able to share that? And I think there might be a place on NJ Dams where we can put that rather than kind of sending it out to everyone.
Yeah.
And also for folks who saw me answer Jim's question in the chat, this is the kind of thing that your legal department or whoever you use for legal guidance will want to take a look at. There's going to be different level of comforts. And also, as Michelle answered, sometimes it's just, somebody's going to go out there and pick up a couple of pebbles. Other times, you're using a track hoe in their backyard. So there's definitely different kinds of, not only the agreement for being on a property, but there may be some, adding people to your additional insureds on a property. So it can get more complex.
But yeah, I would say we can add what we've come up with, which changes. So it also changes. We've had site access agreements for the people that were working on their property, but then we also have adjacent neighbors. So sometimes you just have to walk through someone's property to get to the property you actually want to work on. So we have different templates, and we're happy to share those. And as Beth said, you can modify those as needed.
If anyone has experiences, that they've come up with that they think are worth sharing, as you went through these early studies, just raise your hand, or I think you could just unmute yourself and share that, kind of if you have any do's or don'ts to share, or things that you hadn't planned on that came up during this phase of the project, interesting for everybody else on the call to share. One thing that I thought of as Michelle was talking is in New Jersey, anyway, we have the Office of Permit Coordination. Okay, I always forget the last part of their name, but that is a really good resource for us in New Jersey. And I have to say, good and just getting better. Recently, I'd say within the last year or so, we get these just fantastic summaries of that. And at those pre-app meetings, we have every possible regulator who might want to comment on your dam removal project, you know, from endangered species to SHPO, you know, to you know, more people with concerns about flooding or land use, whatever, and then you get a really nice summary from how those regulators commented during that meeting. So definitely good to schedule that early. Looks like a question, Michelle, do you have experience with removing a dam where there was a large amount of sediment in the impoundment? And if so, how was that addressed or mitigated?
Do you want to
I might take this one. So we have experience with the full range from, you know, almost nothing to quite large amounts. So it's interesting. Number one, as Michelle mentioned during the presentation, is it clean, right? Is it hitting the DEP will have a quite extensive list of compounds that you will be testing for if you have sediment. If it's clean, that's, you know, your first hurdle to get over. And then next, you know, what is the physical characteristics? So not necessarily what kind of chemical contamination will be there, but is it very fine material? Is it sandy? Is it more, you know, are there gravels in it? So we need to understand the physical characteristics. And then you really need to take into consideration how much, of course, that's kind of obvious, and what is downstream of the dam. So in the one picture that Michelle showed, the photo of the Columbia Dam, we were just upstream of the Delaware River. So a nice big open river that was well able to take the sediment, which in fact it had been starved of, right? This is sediment that would have normally gone down to the Delaware. And we just had to monitor frequently when we were in the stream to make sure that we didn't trigger any you know, very high amounts of sediment release at any given time, right? So what, you know, that is a permit condition. So the DEP will tell you what, you know, if you do have sediment and they're concerned about it, they will tell you what number of NTUs, right? The turbidity units that we use, you're allowed to have go downstream, so that it is, you know, it's not like, hey, does this look bad or not? You know, you're looking, so you know the chemical composition, you have an idea of the physical composition, what's downstream. Is it going to go into a river, or in a very different situation, are you releasing it into a fairly flat stretch where you may very well have sediment settling out? If the latter is your situation, then you need to get an excellent, not just a good, but an excellent understanding of where the sediment might settle downstream. And then you will likely be asked by the DEP about how you're going to monitor those locations where, you know, you want to make sure that it's settling out, and you're going to have a plan in place, you know, that if you see sediment settling to a degree that's concerning, what is it that you're going to do about that? You know, then the proactive way to handle that is to make sure that you're metering your construction. You know, you're not taking, you know, the entire dam down in 48 hours. You're going to, you know, use that dam itself as a physical barrier that controls the release. And you'll also have sediment traps downstream, might be, you know, part of your project design that get cleaned out intermittently. Those would be kind of wells almost downstream, constructed with some rocks, so that you're kind of focusing the reception of that sediment, that you can then clean out the sediment. Or, you know, more typical sediment control devices downstream. That's probably enough or even too much about sediment, but honestly, it is, I would say, probably after threatened and endangered species, I would say that sediment and, you know, how it is going to move through your site and where it's going is the number one thing that the DEP is concerned about, and rightly so. It is incredibly important to downstream habitats. So we understand the concern, and you know, there's a lot of different ways that we address it.
And I would just add, it's probably going to be the more costly of things that you do.
Yes.
if
Yes.
required. Another question in the chat. Okay, so there's a question, can you speak about the public outreach we do for larger public projects? We often, I'll just start and then you can chime in. We often do community events and outreach events in connection with the municipalities. So that's kind of the most local level you can get. And so we'll often, reach out to the municipality, introduce ourselves to the mayor, get, definitely have the town's approval, if you will. And then we have them kind of help to get the word out about community events. But I would say the easiest way to get people's attention is to go to those town council meetings. And then, if you have any way to publicly announce an event, we usually just go and we'll go somewhere that is a common place in the town that people know, a town park, or even at, a town council meeting one night, and we just go with a bunch of information and we keep them rather informal. And it's really just a Q&A. We give, information about the project and we're there to listen and to answer questions. But as I mentioned, it's really, really helpful to have an engineer with you because oftentimes you'll get hit with some harder technical questions from the public. And it's nice to have somebody there on the fly that can actually answer those more technical questions. And I hope that answered your question. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think
Okay.
that sounds.
Okay, so are there any real example conceptual design plans available on your website or elsewhere? Conceptual design, I would say no, they're not on the website right now.
No.
I would say it might be something to consider, knowing that, I guess I'm struggling because you recognize there's so many different engineers that are going to come up with these conceptual design plans. We did open up the SDRP to consultants, and so maybe that's something that they can help us with, having some examples for other people. Maybe
Yeah.
that's something we can.
That might be an
Put-
idea
yeah.
for a future information session, like what considerations go into a conceptual
Yeah.
design. Let's try to remember that.
So no, but thank you for
Yeah.
the suggestion. Okay, the sediment release with respect to timeline. I guess if you're trying to keep turbidity under a certain threshold, it can take quite a while depending on how much sediment is behind the dam.
Yeah.
Do you want to?
So the answer is yes, it can take. And then another thing that I'll add. So we're about to work on the Paulina Dam removal, right? So a little bit of a different situation. Columbia, we did have to meter it as it left the site, but we did have a great receptacle in the form of the Delaware River. For Paulina, we do have, 10 miles before we hit the Delaware, and we do have some flat spots. So we need to be a lot more thoughtful about that timeline. And in fact, as I see, okay, Sarah asked this question. As you might guess, if we were to be so super careful, it would be a dam removal that would take, a year and a half, maybe, if that's what we did in this particular case. So we are in fact going to dredge some of that sediment out, which might be, something that you're faced with, depending again on your site and how far it is from the river, if it's a tributary to a larger river. And that again is going to impact your budget. So these are all considerations, and actually I think it's our next session is that on RFPs? No, next one is mussels, and then I think the first week of December. We should really know this before this critical moment.
They're coming up.
But yes, it is coming up. But another RFP, another information session coming up soon is on RFPs, and we will address things like how you want to make sure that you have a good idea of exactly what your job looks like, so that you can make sure you get bids, that are going to be realistic for your project. So for example, if we had bid the Paulina job without a line item in there for dredging, and then we got out into the field, and the DEP, or, close to permitting, and the DEP said, hey, you have to dredge, that is going to be a big difference in the bottom line cost for your project. So if you in fact have to dredge because you can't, you cannot just get rid of the total sediment by metering it out, then that's a big consideration to the cost of your project.
Okay.
Any other questions? Either in the chat, unmute yourself, or even if it's not a question, but something that you would like to share, a stumbling block that you hit, or something that is, I don't want to say a handy tip to get through this, but something that you would like to add with respect to advice that you haven't heard, that would be welcome as well. See, someone is asking about whether or not this is recorded, all of the information sessions, and I think this is number 14 or 15. There are quite a few now. They are all on the njdams.org under resources. You will see all of them, as Michelle mentioned, also on the YouTube channel, so you can get to them either way. But there are now 2 years worth of information sessions out there for you to access.
Great. Jim, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah. May I ask a question? I'm sorry, I was trying to raise my hand and I couldn't figure out how to do that. This is a great presentation, by the way. Thank you so much. I wish I had said in this a while ago. My question is related to community input and engagement. And I was wondering if you, obviously, earlier the better, and earlier and often, the better. But just from a sort of a legal requirement perspective, can you identify at what points that it is required to obtain community input, and under what circumstances, for what permit, like for instance, like a SHPO, section 106 review?
Okay, do you want to do that, or? Okay, so yes, there are definitely times, particularly if if you have an unhappy member of the public and they're also an adjacent property owner, so within 200 feet of the property line, they have more than a casual input, right? So they can, go to DEP and say, I'm not happy with this project, right? So that is, I would say, the official stumbling block, that public interaction. You might want to be out ahead of that. And what that means is that can trigger a public meeting. So not like our public outreach session, but an official public meeting that gets public notice, that is run by the DEP, specifically dam safety, who will, have an official meeting with the public. And that, again, is triggered if someone raises a serious concern about a dam removal, particularly if it's a larger dam removal. With respect to SHPO and what kind of, official noticing or official meetings, that is more like contacting local historic commissions. I've been on a dam removal where they required that, and where they required, outreach to federally and state recognized tribes. So in your interaction with regulators, if they have specific needs that that is something you'll find out in your pre-app meeting. So again, that's another reason to do that meeting early. But for the most part, public outreach and education is not going to be required, right? For the vast majority of people in that town or that community or users. But you ignore public outreach and engagement at your peril. I will say that. It is something that is very time consuming, but ignoring the thoughts or the, I'll say it, emotions of the town that you're working in is a very foolish thing to do, because they can make it comfortable for the dam owner, so the dam owner can, get to the point where they're like, I'm not doing this, I'm not having the entire town mad at me, or that a town might want to put off a dam removal because, the particular mayor might say, hey, I'm not on my watch, I'm not having this big fight. So doing that outreach and education very early and often and in different forms, like Michelle mentioned, right? The town committee meetings, meeting in the park, knocking on doors, all of those things, to get those questions dealt with early on. And even, the way that it is in our experience is that, of all the many people that you're going to interact with, 80% of them don't even know that it is a dam or was a dam or where it is, or that there's even a river in their town, right? I hate to say it, but that's about 80%. And then, 15% are going to be on your side. They're excited. They want to see the ecosystem improvement. They want better fishing. They want more interesting recreation, better kayaking. But it is the 5% that are going to be the loudest, who have whatever their concern is, whether it is fishing, kayaking, historic, they're going to be the ones that you want to identify early on.
And I would just, my only comment to that would be sometimes the public opinion is really great in giving you, those tidbits of history or that local knowledge. Like they grew up in these towns, or they grew up in the area, where you can actually gain a lot from talking to the community and build that into your project. And then even times you can, one of the projects we're working on, there's potential to add in recreational or fishing spots or boat access. And so working with the community on, it's not their dam, or they don't have much say in the removal process, but they might have, they might be using the public park that's downriver. And so when you're out there with equipment and building these design plans, it's really good to consider all those opinions in the community, because you could end up with increased recreation, and you could actually help to kind of put that in your removal design plans to add that community benefit for the long term. So.
Yeah, that's an excellent point that I totally, I missed, which is that they can really tell you this is their river in their town, right? You might find out that the annual picnic every year is held in such and such spot, and then you can, put something in that's an amenity, or at least make engineers and the design team understand, that there is a special space that you either want to preserve as is, or, make better for public access.
Great.
Anyone else?
We're just about at 2:00. We're happy to stay on and answer questions. You're also more than welcome to email or contact us via the njdams.org website if you think of something, after today's information session, or if you have ideas or things that you're curious to dig a little bit deeper into. We'd be happy to hear your thoughts on future information sessions. All right. Well, I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat, and I don't see anybody coming off mute. We'll stay on, like I said, for another minute or so, but I just want to say thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out, and the recording should be online by the end of the week. So thank you very much.